Hey, welcome back, everybody, to day six. Today is Monday, March 28th, and what a better way to start the week than to
Mm.
sit down with one of our favorite educators and book advocates, Donalyn Miller. Donalyn, nice to see
Yay!
you. Good
So good
morning,
to see
Penny.
you. Good morning,
Thank
Kelly.
It's great to
Donalyn,
see you.
it's just so great to see your smiling face. We haven't spent enough time together. I don't know when the last time it was that I actually was in a room with you.
So let's
I'm
start.
guessing.
Let's start with big news, Donalyn. You have a book coming out in just 4 or 5 weeks from now.
Yes.
And I know you wrote it with Terry, and so maybe you
Yes.
could just share a little bit about what we can expect.
So The Joy of Reading is coming out in the first week of May, and I did write it with my dear friend Terry Lassane, who passed away last summer after a long journey with cancer. And the book is really everything Terry and I have picked up over our careers about what we think engages kids with reading. And maybe it's not everything, but it's not nothing that we've. And I mean, Terry was an educator for over 40 years as a middle school teacher, as a college professor, of course, president of Allen, on every book committee possible. I've been a middle school teacher, a reading advocate. So we just really wanted to focus in on the aspects of reading that made it joyful and try to give teachers some practical guidance around that. And a lot of it's things that we know well, just even dedicating time for kids to read is such a foundational part of it. And yet it seems elusive in many classrooms to be able to accomplish on a regular basis. But Terry's also done quite a bit of work over the years on reading response and really interested in reading autobiographies. Carlson and Cheryl's work on reading autobiographies. So we have some reading autobiography work in there to discuss, and just the way that we're looking at how we ask kids to respond to what they read,
Hmm.
and our efforts to honor the transaction between an author who is writing for young people and their real audience, which is the children and the teens, not the teachers. The incredible authors who create books for our young people today are not writing those books so we can turn them into worksheets and novel packets. They are trying to communicate with our young people. And we, we can be stewards of that, but I think we have to look at how our work might actually prevent some of those relationships from forging between children and the authors who write for them.
Well
Breaking up a
said.
read aloud every 30 seconds to ask a probative question, for example, might be an example of something that hinders that relationship between children and their stories from taking place. So, those are just some of the big ideas that might be rolling around in that book. The other piece, and I've said this once before recently, but if there's one through line that runs through my work is that I don't let teachers off the hook about being readers themselves.
Mhm.
But what that also means is that I care about your reading life. I want you to have a joyful reading life too. And that's one thing that I hope the book might accomplish for teachers who read it is that they can get back to some of their own joy for reading, rediscover it, because you're not engaging anybody else with reading if you yourself are not engaged. So maybe we start there. And we really worked to have that come through in the book, that your reading life matters, your kids' reading lives matter. How can we all celebrate what's wonderful about reading and all grow as readers together?
I love that. Could you say more about what it what is the transfer that I love reading that do I have to read with my students in class? What does it mean in teaching?
I have talked to colleagues over the years who do believe that sitting in class reading a book is something that they need to do for their students, and they know their students best. I just know my middle schoolers that would not have worked, and so I feel that the best use of my time as a teacher when kids were reading independently was to confer with them, to walk around. You were doing reading advisory. I mean, we've talked about the difference between that book talking to the class and that individual book talking that you're doing with the kid right there at a shelf or right during a conference, or where you're getting up from a conference and saying, let's just stop, let's just go over to the shelves, or helping a student navigate a text they've chosen independently, but they may need some on demand support in how to read it. That's how I feel my time is best spent as a teacher. I can evangelize the importance of independent reading without having to sit right there with them every single day. Now, having said that, building that routine for kids who don't have a lot of endurance for independent reading, there has been time, let's say the first week or so of the school year, perhaps when I'm not conferring as much, where I have sat down with, let's say, a squeaky table, a table that just couldn't pull it together for, ever how long we were going to read that day, because they're getting into the routines themselves. So I might slide over with the book and sit with the squeaky table for a couple of minutes, but that's a proximity thing, I think, with teachers. Middle schoolers do really well with that. So, but I think our kids need to know that we enjoy reading for our own reasons, that we're not just educated adults standing off to the side telling them they need to read because it's good for them.
Penny and I talk a lot to audiences about how we, Penny and Kelly, became readers ourselves. And I think teachers have lost that like memory, as you said, Donalyn. It's not through worksheets or packet work or, and it's sort of ironic that there's a certain way that we all became engaged readers, and that way is really not central in schools.
Yeah, for sure.
I read a lot of things that I just look at the current culture of trying to control what kids read. And I'm just grateful, I guess, that my mom was clueless. Can I say that? I think my mom reached a certain place where she just trusted me, and she also knew that if I read something that was probably a little too far for me, I would probably put it down. But kids need that freedom to choose books that they read, but they also need the freedom to choose some books maybe that they don't finish reading, or that they pick and realize it's not a good fit for them. That's another, we become a reader, not only from those positive reading experiences, but from also all the false starts. I picked this book. It isn't what I thought it was. Am I in or am I out? Sometimes that book takes us to a place we didn't even know we wanted to go. And other times it helps us, even if it doesn't work out, that interaction helps inform who we become as a reader. I'm learning more about my preferences. I'm learning more about what I gravitate towards and what I don't. I'm learning more about like maybe what my limitations are as a reader and what I might need to work on so that I can approach a text like this later. I mean, these are all questions that only come when kids have the freedom to choose, and that to have the support from adults who can kind of say, well, there's a lot of reasons we might abandon a book. Let's talk about maybe what your reason might be for this book this time.
Don't you feel like some of the time, especially this semester in the fall, how many times I had to reassure a kid that if the text was too hard for them or they were struggling to make sense of it, that didn't mean they were a bad reader. And I would have to say, it is really difficult sometimes to keep the two narrators separate. And these are some of the things I do to help myself do that, that there's this sense that I'm just supposed to get it. And that conferring is a chance for me to offer support, not only for their identity as readers, but for the actual navigation of that text.
I don't know how many kids I've helped make a family tree on a Post-it note, because there's so many primary and secondary characters that couldn't keep up with it all. But even just a little trick like that, I mean, we might know how to do that as adults, but they don't. I mean, it's the role that we really are taking in the classroom as the reader, as the, I don't want to say lead reader, but you know what I mean, the more experienced reader in the room. We're all on the same highway. We can all get to the same destination. You're just at a mile marker behind me. Let me show you what I learned to get to this next part. I mean, that's what I really feel like it is.
I think it's interesting too, is that kids, they don't understand we're all good readers and we're all poor. I don't know if poor is the right word. We're all struggling readers. It depends on what we read. But they think somehow the teacher has this gene that they weren't born with,
Well, or other kids do. This morning I was talking to a friend who's tutoring first graders, volunteer work. He's told to spend 40 minutes on phonics every day. And one thing he said to me today so struck me. He said, you know what? I'm pretty sure these two are actually really good readers, but they're handfuls. And I think in some ways they've put them in this extra reading group to kind of get them out of the class for 40 minutes a day. And I was again just hearing, there's no way that we know if that's the case, but there are times that kids are told they're not good readers because they're just squirrely and uninterested. And I think our obsession with levels and letters and ways to identify growth targets has convinced some of my students that they were never very good at reading because they had so many interventions.
They were never good at the type of reading they were being asked to do in the way that it was measured to show that they were good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how narrow it is, right?
Yes.
Let's just call it what it really is. They were never able to show their reading skill in the way that they were asked to show it. It doesn't really reflect them, as we know. But we're also, a lot of what happens with a reader, you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way we really know what a kid's learning about reading is what they tell us, what they write down. If we don't actually interact with them, how can we even presume to know? That test data may give me one piece of information, but it is such a narrow piece of information. I couldn't hang my teaching interactions with that child around that one measure. And it doesn't tell me very much about their identity as a reader at all,
Mm-hmm.
which means ultimately it tells me nothing. If I can't get into where a kid sees themselves as a reader, it doesn't help me very much at all, help them grow. It's a National Council of Teachers of English position statement on independent reading says the goal of independent reading is to build habitual readers with conscious reading identities.
I know.
That's it. So if we're not talking to kids and giving them that opportunity to self-reflect as readers, then we're not even where the vision of it is supposed to be.
Well, and that comes back to, the central question: what percentage of the reading curriculum over the course of the year involves student choice?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're not going to build reading identity if the teacher's the one who's always selecting or frequently selecting what kids are reading. And I also think, when you talk about the comprehension issue, I think kids came to me with this idea that the comprehension's either black or white.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not something that evolves, right? You could read the first paragraph of any book and there's 20 things you already don't understand. And I think kids think you either get it or you don't get it. And we want to, and that comes through the conferring is recognizing that idea that, that good readers live with ambiguity and learn how to live with ambiguity.
Well, those questions are what pull you through a text sometimes. I mean, I would say often that's what pulls you. You want to see what happens. That's the point of doing it. Or you have questions that you want answered, and you think if you keep reading those questions, the answers will emerge. I mean, that is the point.
Or even just asking kids, what is it that you don't get, right? Because I found so many of them aren't talking about the plot. I know what's happening. I just really don't understand what this book is supposed to just trying to say. That's a sophisticated question. It is far beyond, word attack. And so I just find that I always say I'm nowhere without conferring. And I'll say, you're never going to get the gains you're seeking in reading if you don't confer with kids, period. You won't know what they need, and you won't know how the things that you're doing in class are supporting them or not if you're not talking to them. We just can't get there.
That's why you find 12th graders who haven't read a book in 5 or 6 years, because they sit in a class of 30 something and they hide.
And they'll say, I don't like reading, because they haven't liked anything that's been chosen for them. Or
even if they're mildly interested in what's chosen for them, they're not interested, as Donalyn mentioned, spending 8 weeks extracting things from the text.
I mean, I think what I see prioritized is reading related activities over the reading itself, or what I call language, arts, and crafts. And this is another reason I think the comprehension issue is happening. We are asking kids to display their comprehension while they're still actively gaining it.
Yes.
By making them break up in a chapter every annotation, the marginalia that we've all talked about, and it's like the child is, the reader is actively building the comprehension while we're forcing them to display it. And so I think many readers would break down in comprehension when that's happening. But this is where the reading identity piece, the reading level piece, the reading autobiography piece all kind of come together. Yes. asking teachers to reflect on their own reading experiences really does provide some insight into their own journey as readers. And I think it does build some empathy for what kids may be going through. Because
Oh, for
almost
sure.
every adult reader I taught, here's one thing I know. I've done this, Terry and I've done this workshop before, and I've done it before. Ask 100 teachers in a workshop to just brainstorm 10 books that stuck to them somehow. And I have never been in a room where even two readers had the same list.
Right. Of
Not
course.
never. And I've done
Right.
that hundreds and hundreds of times. Now there's overlap, with
Right.
titles,
Sure.
but
Sure.
this whole idea that there's a certain number of books that everyone needs to read in order to show that they are an educated individual in America today, it just doesn't hold water in a room full of 100 random readers. So why are we still cleaving to that notion? Who does it benefit to still cleave to it?
You
That's the
know,
question I ask.
I was in an 11th grade class last week and sat down next to a kid and just said, "Hey, what are you reading?" And he said, "This book about Afghanistan." He's about halfway through, right? And it's a soldier's account. And I said, "Well, that's such an interesting choice. Why this book?" And he said, "Oh, my cousin served in Afghanistan, did 200 tours, was a squad commander." And, he just kind of lightened up talking about his cousin. And I said, "That's amazing." I said, "Are you going to recommend this to him?" And he goes, "Oh, he died." And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And he said, "He died by suicide in 2018. His whole face changed. And I thought, does this teacher behind me at his desk, does he know this story about this kid? Because we can't with 100 some students a day unless we confer, because they keep coming. Like, he doesn't know me and he's willing to tell that story because I asked about the book he's reading. And that idea that conference, it does tell us about the reading identity, but it tells us about the kids in ways that matter, in ways that change all kinds of our instructional moves with that
Beyond
kid.
reading.
Beyond just being the parts that we love about teaching, the relationship with kids. And I love this title, The Joy of Reading, and the fact that you and Terry collaborated for so long. You said like 7 years. And I'm just, could you give us like 3 things that build joy from your book, from your new book, because it's coming out soon?
Oh gosh, 3 things. Only 3.
Okay,
Well, we know that
15.
we know access is important, and I've talked about access many, many times. But you cannot engage kids with reading if they do not have meaningful access. And access may begin with physical access to text, ebook access, audiobook access, physical print books, the assistive technology that some kids may be able to may need in order to access text. That would all go on that physical access list. But we're also looking at cultural and intellectual access too, the ability to be able to see yourself in the books that you read, to see your communities, to be able to expand your horizons through the texts that you read. Terry and I discovered this. We were trying to see how far back the research went. We're hearing a lot about the research in reading today, these days. So Terry and I wanted to see how far back it went, and we found a commentary piece written in 1910 by a public librarian named Mary Plummer. And we talk about Mary at the beginning of the book and how she was discussing a sea change in librarianship in 1910, where librarians were actually encouraged to be readers themselves in a way that they had not been before. And that
Wow.
was in 1910. And so I really like, one of the things I think that will resonate so much with teachers and librarians is that you can see the relevance between her thoughts in 1910 and how we still see reading now with kids. I just find that so fascinating. Another piece is really, how are we constructing questions to talk to kids, where we leave those questions in a way that's open and doesn't guide a kid towards giving us a specific answer. There's a good conversation about that in the response section, about how even the way we ask a question can change behavior in a kid when we're talking about reading. So do you see yourself as a good reader is not a question I would ask, just because of how it either may cause a kid to shut down. So there's a discussion about that too, and how just the way we engage with kids around reading could either add to their joy of it or diminish it in a way. What else?
So true.
Community, of course.
Yeah.
And Terry and I were a part of a big community that you are also in, of literacy educators and teachers all around the world, really, but the way that communities can support readers. And one of the things that we found, a lot of people have been struggling with their reading motivation, their focus during the pandemic years. And I've talked to lots and lots of readers, adults and kids, about that topic. So there is a discussion of how to navigate slumps in your reading motivation. But the one component of that is how a community supports you. A strong reading community supports you even when you're not reading that much, because they help you sustain your reading identity. I
That's
don't know if
interesting.
this idea that it's a fake it till you make it thing almost sometimes. Like, I'm not really feeling it today, but I'm still talking about books in my classroom. I'm still doing book talks. I'm still hearing books. I'm still hearing about books I might want to read. I'm still being valued as a reader. How can we help kids hold on to their identity as a reader in the future? That's one thing that I've really been interested in is many kids who hit setbacks in their reading lives, the ones I've been talking to, they don't understand it's not permanent. It may be the
Right.
most significant setback they've experienced in their reading lives so far, or their reading enjoyment might be fledgling and now they've hit a setback for whatever reason. And I remember talking to a fifth grader at the end of the year last year, and he said, "Yeah, reading is something I used to like when I was younger." And I'm thinking, you're 10. Like, you're 10
Right.
and you've already just decided your reading life is over. I mean, I would also think, you're still young, kid, but I didn't say that to him, but you're still in the zone of young. I promise. It's not too late.
Yeah.
But this idea that kids will just bail on reading at 10, at 9, and they don't come back, and what's going on there. But that community piece and how it can support and lift up readers even when they are not feeling motivated or seeing themselves as readers in that moment.
Well, I think part of, when you said reading like behaviors, don't you think there is a huge imbalance in class and schools between reading like behaviors and time to read? People will argue they can't find 10 minutes to read and then tell me that they're doing 30-minute mini lessons every single day. To me, that is often a reading like behavior, because the kid
Yeah.
isn't doing any reading. They're
Yeah.
finding an answer, or they're skimming to,
Yeah.
or pretending, or writing on the way to something. There's so much that teachers feel the pressure of, I've got to teach these standards in this way, but that ends up being the preponderance of what's happening.
Yeah.
Is teaching to some particular.
Well, we talk about that all the time. It doesn't matter how many standards you've taught unless kids are actually doing a ton of reading and a ton of writing, right? It starts with volume. And if the volume is not addressed, it doesn't matter how many standards, how many mini lessons that you do. It starts with the actual doing of reading and writing.
I was thinking about, Allington, remember? Doesn't
Who was
matter.
talking about this recently? I'm sorry, Penny, I didn't mean to
Go
talk
ahead.
over you. So I heard this recently, and I can't attribute it to the individual who said it. And I apologize to them. But are we going to have kids practice reading forever, or actually do reading and actually do writing? Or are they just practicing reading and writing? And I think that's kind of also what you're getting to, is that it's all about reading is transformative. It is a transformative act, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally. It is a transformative act, and we have turned it into a performative one. And I think that is something that I think Terry and I are pushing against in the entire book, is that, hey, all these conversations that we're having about teaching reading, where are the readers? Where are the readers in the conversations about reading? Because I don't see them in the room. So, reading is transformative. Unless you can crack a kid's skull open and really, or look in their heart, you're never truly going to know what's happening with them as a reader if you don't talk to them, if you don't let them write, if you really think reading and writing is something that's valuable to them beyond school, then why would you make them wait? Why would you make them wait to feel that? Because a lot of them are not going to feel it if you make them wait 20 years. It's never going to happen. And okay, I never say never with the reader, this, but you really setting kids up to make it so difficult. If they never get to experience it. I mean, if you are an English teacher and you love reading and writing, and you're a librarian and you love reading and writing, don't you want your kids to feel that every single day? Because I do. And I'm also going to make sure that I'm not one of the reasons that they don't.
Mhm.
Mm.
You know,
That's
I
a
mean, I
good
can't
point.
control there's so
Yeah.
much that teachers cannot control about what is happening with
Right.
kids in reading instruction right now. There are sadly so many things librarians can't control about what are happening in their libraries. But man, can we just make sure our kids have more positive reading experiences this year than they have negative ones? Like, can I control that?
Well, Kate DiCamillo posted the other day that a teacher told her her kids need read aloud this year more than ever,
More
and
than
she was
ever.
doubling the amount of time she was reading aloud. My
Hmm.
daughter said the same thing. Her kids are just like so with her when she's reading
Hmm.
aloud in fifth grade. And
Hmm.
I just, do we forget we're the best reader in the room? And they need to hear the way we can make characters come alive. And we have this Yodo player that my granddaughter Maisie has at 4, and all of us in the family can record read alouds to her, and she listens at night. Ellen said sometimes for 4 hours. And then when I say to her, like, hey Maisie, how are you? And she goes, I've been listening to Scarecrow, and she starts coming out with the most beautiful language. She's Cynthia Ryland in that moment because she's hearing it and hearing it. I'm like, how do we not take advantage of this gift that we all have to bring a book to life for kids who maybe have never been read to? How is that not a part of it?
Well, I mean, wasn't it Emil Bookwald who said children are made readers on the laps of their parents?
Mhm.
You know, and that it certainly speaks to the power of reading aloud at home. But you know, we've been tracking the Scholastic tracked it, the what they call the decline by 9 now, where the
Yeah.
peak years of reading interest seem to be about the ages of 8, and then kids spend less time reading for fun. They think reading for fun is less important, and they find then they don't do it as often, of course, and it kind of almost tracks with the decline in read alouds too.
Mm.
Like the decline in read alouds is only about 18 months earlier, you know? So when we talk about what could we do to keep kids engaged with reading, you don't age out of read alouds, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I think I tried to track down if it was one of you that coined First Chapter Fridays, who first started doing that practice in secondary school, but that has caught on with
It's
so many
so
middle school and high
powerful.
school teachers. It's so
Yeah.
powerful. I mean, really, it's a book talk and a read aloud all in one, and you could also, I mean, there's a lot front loaded into the front of a book that you could talk to kids about. Even
Well,
just
and
pulling a
how
few
many
points
times it
out.
created a waiting list in my room because they were
Hmm.
like, whoa, I would read that. Right.
Well, when they
Absolutely.
realize you're not going to keep reading it,
I know.
when they realize that's the other
Oh,
power
I
of First
know.
Chapter. You hook them in, and if they're hooked, then they're like, "What? You're not? What? We're not reading it tomorrow? No, no. Have a good
Hey,
weekend."
maybe somebody listening started First Chapter Fridays and they can tell us, because I don't know who it is either.
Yeah.
Wow,
I,
it's a great practice.
Yeah, for sure.
I can say, and this is not hyperbole, I can say that I looked forward to this conversation all weekend. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Mm.
And every time, when you said you and Terry tried to pour everything you knew about reading into this new book that's coming out, my first thought was if you could pour half of what you and Terry know about reading, what an incredible resource. And if you
Oh,
guys
thank
haven't read
you.
any of Donalyn's previous books, I don't think there are very many people who haven't, but I would certainly recommend them all highly, including the one you wrote with Colby. And I just wanted to say I knew when every time I hear you, I get inspired as well.
Absolutely.
Well, you know that I from the time we crammed ourselves in that tiny room at ILA with people on the floor and all of us
I
presenting together,
remember.
y'all know I would go anywhere with the two of y'all. And uh, I just thank you so
Absolutely.
much for everything that you have done for our profession, but also for me as a teacher.
Oh, thanks for
But
being here,
long
Donalyn.
before I was publishing anything, I was learning from the two of you.
Oh
So
boy.
thank you.
Thank
Well,
you. You
thank you,
have a
Donald. And
wonderful Monday afternoon.
Oh, I will.
And thank you so much.
Thanks for
Bye,
inviting me to
everybody.
bye,
talk.
everybody. See you tomorrow.
Bye.